All right. Hi, everybody. I want to get you started today with your first podcast. And if we are going to study about life, we better figure out how can we distinguish if something is living, dead, or non-living. So one of our very first definitions of life comes from some passages in the 1600s. And what they believed, if you look at the pictures on the screen, they thought that if you would let wheat sit with dirty garments for about 2 weeks, magically mice would appear. And that was the definition of life. They thought that you needed some sort of food source, then actually some sort of filth, some sort of dirt, and life would magically come. Now, I don't know that those mice would play little flutes like this cute guy here in Google Images that I got did. And as we learn more and more about science, though, and into the present day, we have come up with some better definitions to use other than just wheat and dirty garments producing life. And we actually have 8 characteristics, so that's why that big number 8 is on this slide. If you want to think about the different characteristics of life, what you have to keep in mind is that they are 8. So let's go through those. All right, the first idea is that life is made of one or more cells, and cells are actually a major part of what we study. I give you some pictures of a typical animal cell. We've got some human cheek cells, onion cells, and what you see with these pictures that are here in the middle, if you follow where my cursor is at, and you know what, I might even try here to do a little drawing tool, all this new stuff I learned over the summer. These items right here kind of fall under this more cells. You see, a lot of these will form a tissue like in the inside of your cheek or what makes up the onion that you eat on your tacos. However, there is some life like these guys over here. This is called a euglena, and this is one single cell, and that's considered to be an entire organism. So you can either have life that's made up of just one cell or more than one cell. So that's our first one. Our second one talks a little bit about organization. So again, I kind of go back to the cell picture. You can see seems to be a pattern that occurs here with these cells and just how they make up a tissue. And even when we get into an entire organism like this succulent plant that I'm drawing a circle around right now, we see a pattern to how those leaves form. So we'll talk a little bit about atoms and molecules and organelles. Those are kind of the small parts of the science. But as you start building those, more than one atom makes up a molecule. More than one molecule makes up an organelle. More than one organelle makes up a cell. And as we get a little bit more in depth, you get tissues, organs, organ systems like your digestive system, and then finally an organism. So the second characteristic of life is that it exhibits some sort of organization. All right, the third characteristic of life deals with growth and development. So an easy one to think about is, think about you as a baby. And over time, you have different hormones that change your appearance and even to some extent your behaviors. Well, actually, plants have the same thing going on with development. Over time, fruit ripens, and that's usually when we like to eat it, and when a plant has fulfilled its requirements for reproduction. Growth is sometimes a hard one to think about because everyone always wants to say growth is something getting bigger. Well, I like to think about what if you had a really nasty cut on your hand? Those cells in your skin will actually grow to replace anything that's damaged. So life exhibits growth and development. That's our third characteristic. Our fourth characteristic is some sort of reproduction. So whether you look at a puppy that's being born or kittens or baby chicks, all the cute little things in life. And if we look to plants, things like strawberries, they have their seeds out on the outside, or ferns that have spores, and even some of our lovely edible foods. A lot of these have some connection to life in the form of reproduction because it's a way of producing offspring, either sexually or asexually, that continues the genes of that organism to be passed on. So the fourth characteristic of life is that it exhibits some sort of reproduction. The fifth characteristic of life is that life responds to stimulus. So if you look at that cupcake over here, if your mouth starts to water because you'd like to have something that tasty, that's an example of a stimulus. If you've ever watched a Venus flytrap, when a fly hits a particular trigger, it makes the leaves of the Venus flytrap close. Even some things like our bamboo plants typically have a tendency to grow towards the sun, and that's how we get bamboo plants to kind of take on these different shapes. And if you're a fan of Finding Nemo, this bioluminescence is often used to try to pique a prey to get closer to a predator so that they have food. But at all of these examples work on some sort of response to a stimulus, your fifth characteristic of life. The sixth characteristic of life is that all life forms require energy, whether it be directly energy from the sun, as you see in our cute little picture over here, or another energy source that we're going to talk about is glucose. And glucose is a type of sugar, and its formula, you're going to have this memorized, is C6, that's 6 carbons, H12, that's 12 hydrogens, O6, 6 oxygens. And you can see that this is a picture of the molecule of glucose here, and each one of these colors represent one of those atoms that we talked about. So all life forms either get their energy from the sun or from this molecule here called glucose. All right, our next one is all organisms that are living maintain some sort of homeostasis, and I like to call this as thinking of it as a balance. And it's a way that you can maintain the balance of what's happening outside of your body versus what's inside of your body. Water is going to be a very important part to the balance that we talk about in this class with homeostasis. We'll talk about why you sweat or why you may shiver. And we will also talk about what happens if you drink too much salt water or if you have salty foods, how that affects homeostasis in your body. So homeostasis, we'll get a good definition for your notes in class, but it's basically goes back to maintaining some sort of balance in that life form. All right, and our last one we're going to look at is if you follow organisms over a very long period, you will find that they adapt to their environmental conditions. So the pictures of the organisms that I put here, the reason why this bird has such beautiful, bright colored feathers is there is something that within the color of those feathers that helps that bird to survive and reproduce. With this flower here, the reason why it is that color, maybe this is a really good trait for this flower to have to attract pollinators. Take a look at the spines on this cactus here. The reason why it has this adaptation is that those spines have helped deter predators who would have otherwise eaten this poor little guy. And the colors of this butterfly, whether they seem kind of dull and drab, actually help him to be camouflaged for his environment, and he doesn't get eaten, so he can survive and reproduce. Well, those are your 8 characteristics of life. That was your simple homework assignment for tonight, was just to listen to this and jot down any notes that you have. There are some references that I've given you in your packet that will help you if you'd like to read more about this in your textbook. All right, come prepared to class with any questions.